You're listening to Spark TV, where we bring you daily interviews with real women in business at all stages. I'm your host, Danielle Lewis, and I am so grateful to have you here. So good. Fran, welcome to Spark TV.
Thank you so much. It's very nice to be here.
I'm excited to have you because we've just been gas bagging for the last 15 minutes. I'm like, oh my God, we got to hit record.
Yeah, absolutely.
All the goodness will be gone. I love it. Let's start out by telling everyone who you are and what you do.
My name is Fran. I'm originally from Ireland. I've been in Australia kind of officially since 2000, but I was wandering in and out for a couple of years before that. I'm a professional creative, so all my background is related with creative industry, graphic design, commercial photography, videography, illustration, anything creative, well, professional, commercial, creative orientated is sort of my area of expertise.
Oh my God, so good. What brought you to Australia?
I had always had this sort of image in my head of what Australia might be like,
Yeah.
and um, I found the climate in Ireland particularly hard to deal with. I've got a background with asthma, and I got asthma a lot over there, and I just found it
Oh
really gloomy and grim and miserable. And I just had this
my God,
perception.
you came to the right place then.
I had this perception that, Australia was all sunny and, that it would be an outdoor lifestyle. And so I came out on a working holiday visa with some friends. And at the end of that year, I then set a goal to come back 6 months later with one of the friends in the group. And at that point, there was no decision to stay here. It was just, I want more of that.
Yeah.
And got a business sponsorship. It was when Sydney was really booming, coming up to the Commonwealth or to the Olympic Games, it was.
Wow.
And then I kind of just never made a decision that I wasn't going back. I just kept staying. But the
Oh,
quality,
so
the
cool.
quality of life here is very different. And also economically, like Ireland was in a really grim depression at that time.
Oh,
And
wow.
Australia was begging for qualified people and throwing money at us. So, it was like a no-brainer, really.
I wonder how that will transpire with the Brisbane Olympics that are coming up. I wonder if we'll see another kind of influx. I don't know.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Well, I think the circumstances are a bit different now because the cost of
Mm.
living scenario here is very
Yeah.
different to,
Yeah.
like, when I came out here, I felt wealthy with the money coming from Europe, whereas
Mm.
now they're going back to Ireland going, I couldn't last a year because it's so
Yeah.
expensive over there. So from that point of view, there's a big difference.
Mm.
Um, but also, yeah, I don't know in terms of skills. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of skills in demand here, so there probably will be a certain influx. And I
Yeah.
do, I do remember though that, there was this big build up and, all these people coming in, all this money being spent around the Olympics, and then there was like this big gloom and
Yeah.
downfall after it, you
I know
know?
it's a very really weird time for a city, isn't it? It is this
Yeah.
giant boom, which I think is amazing if you can capitalize on it, but you do have to think a little bit more long term about what your plan is if that's the only thing that you're capitalizing on.
Well, there was also the dot-com bust happened
Mm.
at a similar time, and I was working in web design at the time, very progressive web development. So yeah, those two things kind of coincided. There was all this, boom and excitement and the Olympics and the, e-com all coming online, and then it all went boom all at the same time.
Oh my God, that's
Mm.
wild. So when did you then so were you in web design working for somebody else, or have you always been working for yourself as a creative?
Oh no, so like in Ireland, I did my studying at night. So I worked, excuse me, like an apprenticeship style arrangement. By day, I worked in design studios. So I might have been doing artwork as opposed to being a designer initially, and I worked my way up through the system. So by the time I finished at uni, I was actually a senior designer when most people would
Wow.
be just leaving their full-time uni, starting out as a junior. So when I came over here, I was considered skilled, and
Yeah.
I was able to start working as a freelancer. And there were these companies at the time, I don't know if they still, I'm sure they probably still do this, where you basically, your work visa is maintained by like an employment agency. And they essentially
Oh,
pimp
yeah.
you out to companies. We used to call them
Yeah, that
our,
still exists. That still exists.
yeah.
Yeah.
So they held our work rights. And
Wow.
then, they could hire us out to other companies. So, you'd go out maybe for a day to one company, a week to another. But really, what happened very quickly was if you're any good, you ended up being like a long-term
Mm.
employee of the company, just paid by someone else. And they were creaming like a huge amount of money off your hourly rate just for
Wow.
the pleasure of having your visa. So I worked in the corporate sector in Sydney for quite a long time, and I worked my way up through the system. And um, web development was massive at the time. So most of the
Mm.
work I did while I was there was in web, but I did do a lot of print design and advertising work too, depending on what company I was working for.
Yeah.
But after a couple of years, I then got my own permanent residency. So I was able to shake off my pimp and make my own money.
Ah, the pretty woman story we didn't know we needed.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah, so then I had freedom to, because obviously not all companies wanted to have that arrangement as well, you
Yeah.
know? So it gave me a lot more flexibility in terms of who I worked for too. Um, so yeah, I worked in Sydney for quite a long time. And then I went to Africa on a project for a while. It was actually, so when I was in Sydney working in the corporate sector, I was also studying photography again by night.
Ah,
So
yep.
that was part of my initial training, but I went and studied a bit more in Sydney in the Australian Centre for Photography.
Wow.
And then I went on a volunteer project to Africa for 5 months, where I helped build a school and I was like the
Wow.
team photographer. And I also did some project management stuff there as well. So that kind of really changed my perspective on a lot of things. It was in Namibia. So when I came back to Sydney, I kind of looked at my life, which at the before going, I'd, really thought, oh, this is amazing. I'm earning more money than I could ever imagine. But then when I looked at it from the outside, I'm like, well, actually, all I do is work. There's
Yeah.
not much soul to my life here.
Yes.
Um, and I moved up to Byron to hang out with a friend of mine, just to have a little bit of perspective for a few months before getting stuck into anything more substantial. And then I ended up sticking around there for a long time. And when I was there, there was a possibility, well, there was an opportunity to work teaching at TAFE. That
Mm.
was coming up in about 6 months. And I got a job in a little marketing company, just working 2 days a week and working as at the Rails pub in Byron. I don't know if you know that. So it was
Awesome.
like
Yes.
the absolute opposite of what I'd been doing in Sydney. It was like the minimum work possible, minimum wage, but cruisy life, beach
Yeah.
life. And it was really lovely and very chill. And I was kind of holding out for this job working with TAFE. And I got the job, but they didn't actually tell me I got the job. They just called me in for the sort of orientation induction.
That's
And
weird.
I know it was a bit weird. They just said, oh, come in for this. I thought it was another interview. And I was there and I'm like, okay, so they're actually describing what we're going to be doing. It was a group thing. And during the conversation, they were talking about the software we were going to be teaching with. And it was like, Freehand and PageMaker, which were not used at all. Like the industry standard was Adobe. And I
Yeah.
was like,
Wow.
what about Adobe products? And they're like, oh no, we're not teaching those. And I was just like, I can't do this. I can't teach classes to people that are supposed to be learning industry relevant skills with software that isn't used in the industry.
Wow.
And then it also became clear that the hourly rate didn't cover any of your prep time or marking time. So all of a sudden it became a lot less appealing.
Yes. Sounds like
So,
it.
so the combination of those two things then sort of left me a bit at sea, because I'd been sort of hanging out in Byron and was like, yeah, I want to stay here. And, this is how that's going to
Wow.
happen. And then that wasn't what I expected it to be. And just by coincidence, then I started getting asked to do little things. Oh, you take photos. Can you do this? Chef needs a few pictures. And oh, you're a designer, aren't you? Can you do a logo? And, particularly through working at the Rails, actually,
Mm.
I got to know people a bit around the area. And after maybe 6 months of that, I sort of thought, well, maybe I'll actually try and make a go of this. And that's when I started a business.
Wow.
And that first iteration was called Frangipani Creative, because my friends in Byron were calling me Frangipani.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cute. That's very Aussie of us.
Yes.
Oh,
So
wow.
that's kind of how, I evolved into being self-employed.
Mm,
And then my business and how it has evolved over time as my industry has evolved and my interests have evolved and also my personal life has
mm.
evolved. So yeah, it's I've been self-employed for a long time, like that's been on a continuum, but how that's presented to the world has changed dramatically as time's gone by.
How do you navigate that change? So, how do you know when it's time to try something new or let something go? Has that been always an intentional decision for you, or has it been a little fly by the seat of your pants? Like, what's that looked like over time?
I think I have a low boredom threshold, so that powers it a bit,
Yeah.
like I tend to get excited about something, learn it, do it, and then at some point in time go, okay, I know this, I need something more. So there's that fuels a lot of it. But
Mm,
I do have a futurist kind of interest.
mm,
I
yep.
find um, sameness stagnating. I always have one eye on what's coming next. And I know that if I don't, some of change can be intimidating and, sort of knock me back. So I have the headspace that I know if I have one eye on what's coming next, and I can be sort of thinking how I might evolve to roll with that, I manage change much better. And I also
Mm.
can get excited about what's coming. So I guess some of it's been instinctual, some of it's part of the kind of personality I have. And then I guess there is a bit of a strategic note in there as well. It's like,
I'm
well,
sure there
I,
is.
I want
Yes.
to stay in business. So,
Yeah.
I've noticed that web design sales are dropping. What else is out there? That powers it too.
And that's really interesting. You do, I think, as a business owner, whether it's, a strategy day or gut instinct, you
Mm.
do have to do that. You do have to look ahead. You do have to look at how your market is changing, how clients might be, yeah, not willing to invest as much as they were, or whatever that kind of looks like in your industry. But I think
Mm.
you've got to have an eye on the future in business.
I think, like, I'll give you an example. When I started that business, web design was my primary income, and I did a bit of
Mm,
photography and a bit of print design, which I knew how to do really well. Like, that was my background from Ireland, and I noticed because I was really enjoying making kind of animated little websites, but as time
mm,
evolved, websites became much more technically orientated. People needed, they
mm.
weren't, they became less about having a visual presence and a brochure online into being something functional and shops and, technology, and all that part of it left me cold. And while I did
Mm.
always have a team member that did the tech side of things with me, it meant that I had to have my head around that. And the conversation with the client became much more about the tech. And the visuals were always compromising because the tech had to be the lead. So my interest in web design started to diminish as that evolution occurred.
Yeah,
So that,
wow.
yeah, so that would be an example of how that, and at the same time, my photography skills were growing, and my client base and that was evolving and I was enjoying that more. So that would be kind of, web
Mm.
went down, photography went up. That's a kind of an example of an evolution.
What do you think's coming next in your space?
Oh, well, I think we're already well in it, the AI evolution.
I know. I was hoping you were going to say something different. I've been talking about bloody AI for months, but it is
Yes.
kind of taken the world by storm, isn't it? There's nothing we can do about it.
And I actually got into dabbling with this early, like in terms of image generation and stuff like that, and messing
Yeah.
around with Midjourney and all these kinds of softwares. And my initial feeling about it had been, I really want to get into this, I want to be at the leading edge of producing imagery that works with AI and real world skills.
Mm.
Um, but my feelings have changed about it over time. Um,
Really? Tell me
yeah.
why.
Um, I think I don't enjoy it as much as I thought I would. It's
Mm.
irritating that it won't do what I want easily.
Oh my
It's
God.
like,
Yes.
um, and it's lacking something
Mm,
on like a soul level, if you want to call it that.
yeah.
It just doesn't, it's not, I mean, I enjoy working with AI tools, producing imagery. I really enjoy the benefits that they bring, particularly in editing. I
Mm,
love that, for example, I needed a pheasant feather in that shot and I couldn't get one, so I can stick it in later. You know, all those kind of elements I enjoy. But in
yeah.
terms of creating images from scratch using AI, it's a techie job. You're just sitting there at your computer and
Yeah, it's about prompts. It's like,
yeah,
how well can
yeah.
you prompt the AI that's not listening to you properly?
Yeah, exactly. And it's
Mm,
manipulating words. It's not working
yeah.
with visual creativity, which is where my love is, you know. But I think it's created an interesting evolution in me because it's turned me back to the interest in hand-drawn work, you know? So
Mm,
it's kind of brought me full circle because the very first thing that I studied was animation.
wow.
And now I'm doing some things with hand drawing. So I think AI definitely has a massive place to play. And I'm seeing some parallels with what happened at the dot-com, you know, explosion. And, you know, there's this sort of all this stuff happening and, you know, everything's crazy. And then at some point it sort of leveled out and it's like, okay, this is how that's going to be, you
Yeah.
know. And I feel the same thing's kind of happening with AI at the moment. You know, there's so many different tools and, you know, at some point they'll level out and the leaders will come and then the format of how we'll use them will evolve and it will
Mm,
be a continual evolution. You know, it's not like I think the dot-com boom, it sort of leveled out to a certain point and then it evolved at a slower pace. The bit
mm,
that I find a bit challenging with AI is the pace of evolution. It's extreme.
yes.
But I think by nature, humans don't work in at evolving at that speed, so AI has to wait for us a bit. You know,
Yeah.
like what it can do is probably going to be ahead of what we will catch up with. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah. And I find it fascinating your comment as well about how, because so a lot of people that I speak to about AI really only leverage it for the text-based
yeah,
outcomes. So,
yeah, and I do that a lot. Like I use it for editing and brainstorming.
mm,
Like, you know, I'm definitely a bit of a tech nerd. I'm into working with
yeah.
it.
But I love your comment about how it's actually brought you full circle to leveraging more of your innate talents and getting back into you physically, drawing and animating, because that's almost what's happening in the copy-driven world as well,
Mm,
is people are realizing that the stuff that's coming out is so generic, they just sound like everyone else. And so now it's almost we kind of actually have this amazing opportunity to stand out just by being
yes.
ourselves, by not,
I, yes.
totally relying on the robots.
And I think humans have a value perception in relation to
Yeah.
what AI spits out
Yeah.
versus what a human creates. Um,
Yeah.
and I think there's a very clear, I mean, as humans, when we create something, we are influenced by everything we see. So there isn't
Mm.
anything completely original as such, but the
Mm.
way we gather all those elements and produce something new is our own little iota of originality.
Yes.
But AI doesn't have that iota of originality. It can only regurgitate stuff it's already input. Like
Yes.
it can't create that new extra iota of something special. And I
Mm.
think that's something that we as humans appreciate and and we're the ones buying. So
Mm. And I
um
think the discernment as well, that's the one thing that's also starting to come on my radar as well, is as humans, we can categorize what we know to be true, what values align, whereas AI is just a product of the information it's fed, and half the stuff on the internet's crap, and but that is what it's drawing from to produce whatever we've asked it to produce. So it doesn't have that level of understanding of what is true and fiction, or, where our values lie. And I think that, again, is our superpower as humans.
I think something else that people don't have a full perception of yet, and I think this is going to have a big impact, is if you think the amount of content that's now being produced by AI, and that's going to
Mm,
increase massively, but then
yes.
it's going to be sucking that data in as its data set to work from as well.
Yeah. It's like this
So,
self-fulfilling spiral of no good.
of crap.
Yeah, crap.
So
Oh.
I'll be interested to see how that evolves and whether
Mm,
the fact that, like, there's absolutely no doubt from what I've seen that the majority of commercial imaging will, in the next 5 to 10 years, be done by AI. Like, there's
yeah.
just no reason why it wouldn't be.
Mm,
I mean, it needs a driver, it does need an art director, and
yeah.
there will be people in those creative directing roles that need to be very multi-skilled and very creatively talented to produce cool and interesting creative.
Yeah.
But there'll also be a whole lot of crappy stuff that will be just, considered reasonable and okay and adequate. But
Yeah.
when that becomes the majority of work going out on the internet, and that's the reference material these learning modules are using to iterate new concepts from, I
Yeah.
believe it's going to become very homogenized and potentially not be an acceptable quality. But I don't know if that's a fair perception.
I tend to agree with you because, and maybe that's just me thinking about how it is today.
Yeah.
But it is just, I just think of like my own browsing experience on Instagram as an example, where because I follow a lot of women in business, I
Mm.
just get so bored
Mm.
and frustrated by just everything in my feed is exactly the same, following the same formula, using the
Hmm.
same language. Like it's so even though the faces appear different, the content's so much the same that I'm so bored by my own feed that I've
Yeah.
literally to the point where I've gone, I need to start looking at fashion and art and
Hmm.
things that are totally unrelated to my industry just to find some inspiration again.
Mm.
But because I guess because I'm having that experience and that is what AI is producing, I do really feel like that's kind of the direction that we're headed in. And especially if people are lazy, I'm not saying they will be, but if people are lazy and keep relying on it and keep taking what it spits out and just popping it up there like it's gospel, I kind of feel like it is a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Prophecy.
See? Oh my God. Well, time for another coffee.
I do
Um,
that all the
yeah,
time. I'm
I
really
was like,
glad you did it first.
I'm like, where is that word in my mouth? Oh my God, hilarious. But yeah, so I feel like it is just, yeah, if we keep feeding it crap, but keep using what it spits out and not injecting our own personality or taking the time to fact check it or, put our own tone of voice on it. You're right. It's going to be trained by that same crap that it's been put out, and if we're too lazy to do anything with it, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. But I see that as a positive for all the people who are willing to perhaps use it to cut a little bit of time, but
Mm.
then we'll go over and put their own
Yeah,
spark
absolutely.
on it.
Absolutely. And I think, when it comes to words, that's very relevant, because, now you can tell at 50 paces whether something has been
Yeah.
generated by AI if it hasn't been properly edited and, manipulated by a human.
Mm,
But in visual terms, it's also, in some ways, the technology is getting so good that it's hard to tell the difference.
yeah.
Like, I've done a few experiments with people, which of these images do you think is AI and which is real? And,
Mm,
generally people get it wrong. Like you can't
wow.
pick it straight away, but there is something, there's just a feeling. I can't even describe what it is. It's an intangible something that
Mm,
I think we notice on
yeah.
some level.
Yes. And I think that, like, that's human nature, right? That is
Mm,
why you can stand in front of somebody and get a bad vibe from them. Like that
yeah.
is like one of our superpowers as being a human, and why people buy from good people. Because, and even if it is, I say to people, it doesn't, things can be messy and chaotic, please, case in point, me. And people still buy from you because if you are authentic, people get your vibe more
Yeah.
than has she articulated this in 10-point plan and it's, immaculate.
Yeah.
There is feeling, and that human connection is just so much a part of what we do, whether it be face to face, visual, written. We've got to remember that.
And that's probably a lot to do with why, the trend in social media is very much real people authenticity. And
Yeah.
that's what people are buying from. They want that sense of human connection as
Yeah.
opposed to polished AI corporate imaging.
Exactly.
Mm,
Yeah. Which is, I think, is great for women in business. It's
mm,
funny, like one of the biggest roadblocks a lot of women in business have is they don't want to put themselves out there, and I'm guilty of this. I'm like, I don't want to be there unless I have some makeup on my face and what have you. And I'm like,
hmm
oh, what is these pimples that are going on? Like, and I don't want to get out of bed today. But that is the thing that people connect with. They go, oh, yeah, cool. You're a real human. Now I want to listen to you and learn more about
Mm.
why you do what you do.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's funny you say that because, like, I've literally had an absolute aversion to appearing on social media for pretty much my whole career.
Yeah.
And, if I look back on, like, there's a makeup artist that I worked with when, it's early days in Byron, when Instagram was starting to become a thing. And I was so irritated by her. I was like, would you put the bloody phone away? Like, what is, you're just wasting time. And now she's got like, I don't know, 500,000 followers and doesn't get out of bed for less than, Naomi Campbell rates. And,
Yeah.
who's laughing now?
Yeah. I know. Damn it.
And but my feeling was like I hated the idea of being in front of camera, and I also found it really hard to feel like the time I was investing in putting stuff on social media was actually doing anything because I felt like no one's listening,
Yeah.
so like and of course now I'm sort of starting to have a bit of a different attitude about it, but it's still, I'm still no one's listening, like I have to get through
Bloody
that.
are. They
I had
are.
to get through that phase,
Yes.
and getting through the phase is hard because when no one's listening, I find it hard not to quit. But
Yeah, I know. And I always go back to, you think sometimes, oh my God, only 10 people have liked my photo. And it's like, yeah, but if 10
10, wow,
people
that's good.
were standing in front of you being like, oh my God, that's really interesting. I really
Mm,
resonate with that. You'd be like, whoa, look at all these people. But for some reason, social media, I think, has gotten our scale of
yeah.
what is good and not good, like completely out of whack.
But the other thing I've noticed recently, because I have been posting a little bit, is, people go, oh, I saw you did that shoot you did looked really fun when you were at that. And I was like, you didn't like that. And they're like, oh, no, I don't like things. And I'm like, well, it
Yeah,
would be
everyone's
nice if
lurking.
you did. Yeah, everyone
They're
just lurks.
lurkers.
So they're
Yeah.
watching, they're watching.
Yeah.
So, it's funny that knowing that that's happening kind of gave me a little bit more encouragement. It's like, okay, I'm
Yeah.
not just talking to myself. There are a couple of people listening.
Yeah. It's so true. I think we get hung up on metrics sometimes that perhaps don't really matter.
Hmm.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. What do
But
you,
when
and that's, yeah, sorry, you go.
I was just going to say, when you're trying to decide, do I spend the half an hour it's going to take on to
Mm.
making this post, or do I spend a half an hour in editing these photos so I can go to bed a bit earlier? It's like, well, I
Yes.
don't think anyone's listening to that, so I'll probably just do that.
Yeah, I
It's
choose
like,
bed. Always choose bed.
mm.
No, and it's interesting. And I think, good segue, speaking of challenges, I'm super fascinated because I don't have a lot of, I guess, full creative types on the podcast. I'm
Okay.
interested to know what challenges you've had as a creative entrepreneur. Do you think that they have been kind of the same as everyone? Everyone has challenges in business, or do you think as a creative, running your own business is a little bit different?
Hmm. Well, I guess I can't speak for non-creatives, so
Yeah.
I don't. I think one thing that can be quite challenging as a creative, and I think this is an issue not just as a creative business person, but that runs through society, is that creative industry isn't valued in the same way in financial
Mm.
terms.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about this a lot in relation to, like, I have a son at junior school, just heading to high school, and he's a creatively orientated child. And in Australian junior school, art is treated like an extracurricular fluff activity.
Ah,
It's
yep.
not treated as a serious subject that can earn you money in the future. And
Mm.
yet, if you look at GDP and how much creative industry brings into GDP in Australia, it's almost 3%, which doesn't
Wow.
sound that much, right? But if you compare it to mining, mining is less than 10%.
Wow, really? Okay.
Yeah. If
Hmm.
you look at sport, if you're a kid in school and you're a sporting superstar, look at all the energy and effort that's put into sport in school. Sport only brings less than 1% GDP to Australia.
Wow.
So when you look at it in economic terms, it's
Mm.
like, why isn't there more credibility and financial, you know, precedent given to creative industry? And
Mm.
why is it so undervalued? And I think that comes from the idea that people go, I could slap a logo together myself. That
It's
was
like the
just a couple of
The
letters
Jackson
and a
Pollock,
squirrel.
the
You know,
Pollock paintings where they, oh, I could
hmm
do that.
Yeah.
It's like, well, yes, but you didn't.
Yeah, but I think there's that perception, if you're
Mm.
willing to pay an accountant or a lawyer
Mm.
$300 an hour or more, I don't know, because, oh, well, they've had to study all this time and they know stuff I don't.
Yeah.
Whereas the perception of what creative people do is like, oh, well, I could probably do something similar, but it's not my area of expertise and I'm busy, so I'll just pay you a bit. But you really want that much money? And it's like, well, yeah, I actually had to study really hard to do this too, and I'm good at this. And I do a much better job than you do, and I know about your target audience and what they will be triggered by, and there's all this knowledge that you don't have that I can offer, but I shouldn't have to justify that, you know?
No, it is wildly frustrating, isn't it? And it's,
Mm.
one of the industries where you just hear so much as well, like the exposure, used as a dangling tool to pay people. And I think that that happens across creatives, art, modeling, photographers.
Oh, it's
Um,
crazy.
even I was in the influencer marketing industry. That was my previous gig for a decade. And even that was wild because it was this
Mm.
new thing that wasn't understood. It was on social media, it was visual driven, creative driven. That was people's attitude as well.
Mm.
I want to give you a free product, or I'll share it on my channel, or whatever it is. And it's like these people are spending so much time and effort, not only honing their craft as creators, so whether that's video or photography or
Mm.
written, but also developing audiences. Like, so all of these things that you don't have,
Mm.
Mr. Brand, but
Mm.
are not willing to pay for. It is a wild industry.
Yeah, but I think the problem actually stems right at the beginning. It's not
Mm,
it's not treated seriously at a school level.
yeah.
I can see at high school, certain high schools do,
Mm,
but a lot of them don't. A lot of the academically driven high schools still don't treat it as a serious subject and a serious
yeah.
career. And I think that is a very challenging thing for people in creative industry.
Do
Um,
you think that that'll shift? We were just talking about AI and how
mm,
human creativity is going to be so valuable. Do you think that there might be a shift when we see the world fall
I
apart
think
from the sea of sameness that is AI?
I think the unfortunate side of it is that because AI will take up so much of the creative industry roles, that it will reduce the scope of employability in creative industry.
Oh,
But
that's so sad.
but for those people who are really good and original and put all the effort in and are multi-skilled, there's definitely still plenty of space for them. And I
Yeah.
also think that it like there has already been a movement of a reemergence of hand skills and craft, and I think
Mm,
this is amplifying that. But the scale is, it's smaller
mm,
than the quantity of people currently employed in the industry. So, I mean, I don't have you know, I don't have like a glass sphere that I can stare into and say this is the future, but my perception is that certainly the opportunities in the industry shrink, because also the fact that AI is churning out stuff
mm,
devalues anything that is of a similar quality level, you know?
yes.
It's like, oh, well, I can get, you know, like rather than doing a photo shoot for a range of clothing that takes a full day that needs hair and makeup models, assistants, lighting, the whole works, I
Mm,
can get, one 20-year-old sitting at their home laptop to churn out something that looks equivalent for, $25 an hour in another country. So,
yeah.
um, so that will have a knock-on impact,
Yeah, absolutely.
especially when you see big brands, actually using AI imagery with their work as well. It's not just little brands.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's definitely going to be a big contraction in some areas, but that doesn't mean that there won't be an expansion in other areas. But the overall perception is that just being employed at all might be a bit of an issue as time goes by.
Oh my gosh. The state, I just, yeah, it's going to be so fascinating what actually happens in the next decade. I just think,
Mm,
if you and I got on a call in a decade's time to talk, to
yeah.
reflect on this conversation, I just, it is moving so quickly, but it really does feel like we are at that point in time where, yes, it's moving so quickly. Yes, it's mind blowing what you can do, but then there is all of that, those questions around, well, what does that mean for people, creativity, jobs,
Mm.
industries? So it is that really funny time. We're all like, oh, this is exciting, but I don't know what's
Mm.
going to happen. So
Well,
yeah,
there
it'll be
there are
interesting to
some
see.
countries that have done experimentation with universal income. Have you heard of those?
No, what is this?
Um, so basically the concept, let's say the concept is that rather than a big corporation paying people to work for them,
Yeah.
that they pay some sort of extra level of tax to the government for the fact that they're producing stuff, but in that country, and that
Mm.
that money then gets shared out as like a universal income, like there'd be a base
Oh,
level of income that
wow.
everyone would get.
Yeah.
Um, that would be a living income, that's enough to get by,
Yeah.
and that may actually be something that needs to happen
Wow.
for survival of mankind.
Oh my God.
So yeah, there's a couple. If you look up studies of universal income, there's several countries that have done trials of this and had incredibly positive results with it as well.
Really?
Mm.
So does it allow then the people to pursue what they want to pursue, or is it
Hmm.
just, yeah, okay.
Yeah. But the
Wow.
reason that I guess it's only at a trial point at this stage is, well, it's possible to find work in other ways, but they're
Yeah,
sort of
exactly.
sussing out if it got to the point where, we've got 20% unemployment, what are we going to do? That
Yeah.
this may be an approach. So yeah,
Wow.
I would see that's potentially on the horizon.
Wow. It just makes me think of, all of the movies, like the end of days movies that you watch. And I just think, wow, it's almost feels like this is the start of, yeah, just a ginormous shift in the way we function as a society.
Yeah, well, it definitely is. It's like, all those ages through history, the Iron Age, the Bronze Age, and
Yeah.
I think the AI age is a big shift for sure.
Wow.
Mm.
Oh my God, we could talk all day.
I know.
But so I always love to wrap up these podcasts with one last piece of advice. So,
Yes.
reflecting on your time in business, what
Hmm.
would be a piece of advice that you would give to another woman on her business journey?
Um, I guess a lot of people are very surprised when they hear how long I've been self-employed. And I would say the reason for that is what we've been discussing earlier, which is always having one eye on what's coming next and figuring out how you're going to evolve before you're in a situation where you have to evolve.
Mm,
That's, I'd say, being always ready to change. And I think humans have a real inclination to cling to the past.
mm-hmm.
But they've two big inclinations. One is to be sheep. They like to follow each other. Nobody likes to be the one at the front. They like to do what everyone else is doing. And then the other thing is they fear change. People don't like change. They like comfort. And to me, if you're going to be a successful business owner, you need to be able to do the opposite of both of those things.
Wow.
You need to be able to embrace change, and you need to be brave enough to try stuff that, other people aren't doing, or trying something new. And if, you fail at it, that's okay, because you'll still learn from it. And, you know, business, businesses never, you can't go, I've made my business now, that's done.
Mm-hmm.
It has to evolve and change. And, it doesn't necessarily have to keep growing, but it has to keep changing, or it will stagnate and die.
Yeah.
Um, something I also did a certificate in business and marketing strategy when I was in Sydney, and I very distinctively remember, I don't know the technical name for the curve, but they had this little curve, right? And they showed the beginning of business and how it went up. And then there's this, point where it's the plateau. And it's
Mm,
like, okay, now at that point, either you start a new curve and go off with your next idea or next iteration, or inevitably you're heading down the way here. And if you look at all major businesses in the world that have lasted for a long time, they've
mm,
always created that new concept or that new evolution that kept them flowing forwards. And
yeah.
any of those that sort of went, this is what we do and we're sticking with that and nothing else, you see them fade off into, you know,
Well, it reminds me of the
obscurity.
famous Kodak story,
I was
Yeah.
specifically thinking about Kodak when I was saying that.
Exactly. And it just makes so much sense, right? I think that
Mm,
yeah, this has been such an interesting conversation around that. I think sometimes it's almost a blessing and a curse as a business owner. You are always thinking about what's new, what's shiny, what's next, what can I, but I think if you actually leverage that and harness that to
mm,
keep your one eye on what's coming and plan for the future, yeah, it can be so powerful for a
mm.
business.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Oh my God, you're the best, Fran. Thank you so much for spending your time with the Spark community and coming on the Spark TV podcast.
Well, it's been a pleasure. I find what you're doing very inspiring, so I'm delighted to be part of the chat.
That wraps another episode of Spark TV. Shout out to Spark TV sponsor IP Australia for their amazing support of the Spark podcast and women in business. And if no one tells you today, you've got this.